Well, my goodness, yesterday's presentation certainly did stir up a bit of a hornet's nest. We'll talk about that, and we're going to talk about some really important learnings I've had in life about how to understand where you are in a conversation versus a debate versus a belief-laden sort of approach to things. All right, everybody, hello. Dr. Chris Martenson here with your daily update. Today is May 13th, 2020. This is day 111. 111. We got a palindromic day here, and I'm titling this one Backlash and the Backfire Effect. Before we get started, I'm going to start with an opening quote of the day, and this comes to us from Dave DD. Hey, Dave keeps posting great stuff at our site, and I keep quoting him because he posts stuff I like quoting. And he posted this quote from Steve Jobs. I really like this. It says, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify them, or vilify them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do." And Dave DD wrote, "Chris, Adam, and all non-trolls, fellow PP forum contributors, take this as a compliment." From Steve Jobs in 1997. Thanks, Dave DD. I will take that as a compliment, a very big one, because I'm not fond of rules. And I do believe that we can change the world. And I know that I'm doing what I can in my small corner of it, and that has an effect. So we're going to talk about how yesterday's piece where I was exploring the idea of, was this virus, COVID-19, natural or not natural? I knew that was going to ruffle some feathers. That was going without saying. And having been very deeply in the science community as a researcher and all of that, I kind of know the territory that goes along with that. And suffice it to say, I'm really glad I'm not in that particular environment anymore. I like being out here where I'm able to be curious, open-minded, and ready, willing, and able to both pick up and put down different opinions pretty quickly if I need to. So let's talk about this really quickly, because I need to differentiate between facts, opinions, and beliefs. This is something I do in the very first chapter of the crash course, which, by the way, if you haven't watched the crash course, maybe you've got a little stay-at-home order time on your hands, I would highly recommend you watch the complete crash course. Last updated in 2014, obviously 6 years out of date. There'll be a few charts in there that are a little out of date, especially the ones on the Federal Reserve and their ridiculous printing, which was awful back in 2014. Today, it's just supernova. We don't know what to make of it. Just ridiculous. At any rate, first chapter, I differentiate facts, opinions, and beliefs. And here's why this is important. Look, facts exist. They're real. They can also be wrong and replaced by newer facts that are either more complete or more accurate. Maybe they're more nuanced, all sorts of things, right? So facts is the first order of things. You and I, we might share facts, right? And we haven't had time to assemble all the facts into an organized opinion yet. So we might have different facts at hand, and we might talk about them and swap them, right? I might give you the fact that today it seems to be about 52 degrees here in western Massachusetts. You have a fact that it's maybe 77 degrees where you are. That's fine. It'll take time sharing a lot of facts like that before you and I might form an opinion about what season we're in, or whether those are too high or too low or not right. You know, after a lifetime of gathering data about temperature, I'm of the opinion that this year is ridiculously cold and windy. It's in the middle of May, and we're facing another frost warning tonight, and we had it's just been cold and miserable. It's an opinion, all right? Let's go further, though. What happens, what's past facts, as I hinted here, opinions. So opinions, they're formed from a collection of facts, all right? You might have an opinion about the best baseball pitcher or brand and model of vacuum cleaner, all right? New facts can change opinions. Here's how you know you're about to change somebody's opinion. You say, hey, I have a different vacuum cleaner. It happens to have this level of ability to filter out particles, and it has this amount of suction in cubic feet per minute, and it only costs this much, and it's less than yours. And I might present you those facts, and you might say, oh, well, I had an opinion that I had bought the best vacuum cleaner, but you know what? I think yours is better. Facts change opinions, and they do so without a lot of fuss, right? Opinions can just come and go. New facts modify them. and have an impact on those opinions. But belief systems, however, belief systems are emotional constructs. And so when a belief system is confronted with new or uncomfortable facts that it doesn't like, a belief system will lash out emotionally. All right? In fact, that leads to a rule of life that I carry around with me, which is this. When faced with an emotional outburst, I know I'm dealing with a belief system, not an opinion. All right? So when people respond with emotional outbursts, it could be anything. You could say, I think this public school my kid goes to is awful, and a member of the PTA all of a sudden just explodes and tells you what a horrible person you are and blacklists you from every possible social function thereafter. They respond with a huge emotional outburst because they have a belief system. Their belief system is not based on the facts about how good or bad the school system is. They just have a belief system that schooling is important and that their kid's in a good school and they've done the best they can for the kids, and maybe that means that they've done better than their own parents did. They're like a whole associative tree of material there, which means that when an uncomfortable fact comes along, it's going to be met with a wall of emotion, not a dispassionate, oh, well, tell me why you think this isn't the best school system and let me gather some more data around that. So facts, opinions, and beliefs, it's good to know what you're up against. So I felt like there was really no help from the club. There was a lot of pushback against this particular piece I did yesterday on the lab-made versus natural origin of COVID-19. And somebody put up that Nature paper again, and as if it was proof of something. And so I just simply asked, well, where did that PRRA insert granting a fern cleavage site come from? It's a very neutral question. And Christian G. Anderson, a prominent virologist, said, where did humans come from? ? Pretty flippant. And then this guy, Jason Kindrachuk, said, this made my day. Clap, clap, clap. These are all virologists here, okay? So this was sort of the dismissive attitude that I was met with. So I said, look, I'm a smart and curious person with legitimate questions. You have or had a prime opportunity to educate me and others. Instead, I feel as if I wandered into an exclusive club of mean kids. Your profession has a legit image problem right now, and in my opinion, you've settled on a poor repair strategy here, right? So I'm legit curious. As I said, I'm not settled. I'm just telling you that what bothers me about the virologists is that they are stating declaratively where this virus came from, even though they have no proof of natural origin, and they fall back on saying, there is no proof of lab origin, and therefore it must have come from nature. I'm like, why can't you just flip that around? I'm an open, curious person. I can see both sides of this, right? Absolutely ready to think and be shown that this came 100% through a natural origin. I also believe there's strong evidence it could have come from a lab. It's unsettled in my mind. But when people are speaking about this as if it's settled, and worse, they shout down people who are trying to ask legit questions, well, that makes me super suspicious, right? Because I don't believe that when I'm faced with that I'm actually dealing with anything that's actually just an opinion. Which brings me to something I want to talk about now, which is called the Backfire Effect. I loved learning this. This one really changed I love these things that when I get a hold of them, they completely change my point of view on something. So this is really interesting. If you haven't studied this, I would invite you to study it. Here's one link here, but I'm going to give you, I think, the link to the best explanation of the Backfire Effect. It's actually a cartoon in oatmeal.com. I'll show you that on the next slide. But here, what is the Backfire Effect? The Backfire Effect is the tendency of some people to resist accepting evidence that conflicts with their beliefs. The effect is demonstrated when people presented with that conflicting information become even more convinced of their original beliefs rather than questioning them. Common sense tells us that if we are presented with new information that clearly suggests that we've been wrong about something, we will consider that information and adjust our thinking on the matter. That may happen most of the time. I disagree with that sentence. However, some people in some cases will react illogically. The Backfire Effect is one manifestation of confirmation bias, the tendency of people to give more credence to evidence that supports their pre-existing beliefs. In this case, the bias is so strong that people refuse to consider the possibility that they were mistaken. Data that does not support their beliefs is dismissed, and, perhaps because they know on some level that they were wrong, they profess even greater confidence that they have been correct all along. They may dismiss data as statistical noise and take even more extreme positions on issues than was initially the case. In other words, new data doesn't weaken their beliefs, it backfires and it strengthens their beliefs. And it's a really well-known psychological phenomenon. This is the best read on the backfire effect. It comes here from the oatmeal.com/comics/believe. Here's just one chunk out of the middle of the whole thing, asking, why would providing more evidence make someone less likely to believe in an idea? It seems backwards and batshit fucking bonkers to me. It turns out that batshit fucking bonkers has a name in the world of neuroscience. It's called the backfire effect, and it's a well-documented psychological behavior. So it could be around anything, but if somebody has a really strong belief that they hold and they're presented with evidence that runs against that, they're going to make a really illogical contortion of mental leaping to avoid actually looking at that data. And by the way, I just showed you a few clips out of my Twitter feed, but I actually went back and I provided solid evidence. I said, hey, here's a series of Dr. Jason guy wrote a big article that said this had to have come from bats. It came from bats. It's from bats. We all know that. Every scientist agrees it's all from bats, right? So then I posted this piece of data that we went through yesterday, and I said, well, isn't this odd that actually the receptor binding domain of the S protein has the most similarity to pangolins? If you're just a straight scientist, and I didn't label these things on the side telling you whether it came from bats or kangaroos or pangolins or killer whales or whatever, and I just said, look at these sequences, tell me which one you would focus in on first as being the most probable proximal source of this thing, and any actual scientist would go, oh, must be the pangolins. Look at that. 5 out of 5 receptor binding domain motifs, 8 out of 9 adjacent amino acid motifs. It doesn't get any closer than that, right? And that 9th out of 9th amino acid motif that wasn't right was a really close swap. It was a polar for a polar amino acid, which means that's a good swap. If it was a polar for a hydrophobic, the whole thing would fall apart, right? So that's what good science would lead you to do. But I presented that, and I got called a conspiracy theorist, right, for presenting that. And that's what happens. I was presenting evidence, but that evidence would have caused, I believe, and I believe it did cause, a backfire effect. Because that evidence says, gosh, I don't have a good explanation for how it went from a bat into a pangolin and then into a human. That's a really crazy set of jumps because it had to jump multiple species. And now this same virus has jumped into cats and tigers, dogs. So it didn't even just like do this crazy spillover where it was waiting, and finally it spills over, into a new species. This thing suddenly spilled over into a bunch of species, which would be more consistent with the idea that not only did this thing actually have some gain of function, but it gained a crap ton of function all at once, right? Where else? Show me where else in history we have something that operated like that. I couldn't find a single other viral example that did that same thing, where it suddenly started affecting all sorts of different species at once. Kind of crazy. All right, moving on, leaving all of that aside. Tempest in a teapot. Don't worry about it. One last little piece of data here. We're going to switch gears entirely, but came across this yesterday talking about this lasting lung damage. We'd presented this before. We'd called it permanent. Now I'm calling it lasting. We don't really know how long it's going to last or if it's permanent, but there's a bunch of new data that came out recently. Well, not that recently, April 27th, a couple weeks ago. But it says here, among patients who have recovered from COVID-19 in China comes the first evidence that some may suffer long-term lung damage from the disease. In 70 patients who survived COVID-19 pneumonia, 66 had some level of lung damage visible in CT scans taken before hospital discharge. Researchers report March 19th in Radiology. The damage ranged from dense clumps of hardened tissue blocking blood vessels within the tiny air sacs called alveoli, which absorb oxygen, to tissue lesions around the alveoli. That's not good. So let's keep on with this and see what they say here. The tissue lesions can be a sign of chronic lung disease. Similar damage has been documented in survivors of SARS and MERS, respiratory diseases caused by coronaviruses, similar, but not that similar, to SARS-CoV-2 virus behind COVID-19. Long-term studies of SARS patients have shown that roughly a third of people who recovered from severe bouts were left with permanent lung damage. So, yeah, a third of people who had severe bouts had that permanent lung damage. In the case of MERS, one study found about a third of people who recovered from a serious infection still had signs of lung damage about 7 months later. So that's not permanent, but who knows if that recovered even further after that. I don't know. But while initial lung images indicate SARS and MERS typically set into just one lung, COVID-19 appears to be more likely to afflict both lungs right away. So that's that bilateral pneumonia, all those ground glass opacities that you're seeing in both lungs. In 75 of the 90 patients admitted to the Huazhong University Hospital with COVID-19 from January 16th to February 17th, about a month there, damage was seen across both lungs. So 75 out of 90, what's that, 80-some%. Wang and colleagues report CT scans taken before hospital discharge revealed that 42 out of 70 displayed the type of lesions around the alveoli that are more likely to develop into scars. Scar tissue in the lung is usually fairly permanent. All right, this is a short one today. All of this leads me to my conclusions. During the reaction to whether COVID-19 was natural or lab-made, I encountered mostly from the Twitter virology community hostility, anger, frustration, dismissiveness. And this all led me to the conclusion. I was up against beliefs, not opinions or credible positions. And I get it. If you feel attacked, beleaguered, anything like that, you're probably going to react this way. I get it. And particularly if maybe you think somewhere down the line your reputation or your job or something is on the line, I get that. However, I would completely disagree with the approach. I would want to have a very welcoming, very open approach. And I've told you several times that if I was in their position, I wouldn't be saying declaratively, this had to have come from bats, it was natural, hey, that's it. And anybody who disagrees is conspiracy theorist. I would be going, hey, look, totally it's possible it could have come from a lab. I don't think so, here's why, right? Until that tone is adopted, I'm very suspicious of people who are, methinks they are protesting too loudly, right? That's my point of view there. So that makes me suspicious. Remember, everyone, opinions are amended or even changed based on new facts. Beliefs lead to emotional outbursts, right? You crazy conspiracy theorist, you're going to kill people. Really? I was just asking a question about this polybasic fear and cleavage. Like, no, you're going to, blah, 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 right? It's just, that's how that goes. The Backfire Effect, super real. I invite you to read that and read up into it. Take a good 10-minute read here, but read. This is awesome, the way the oatmeal runs through that. And sorry for the language if anybody found that offensive. I don't. I'm kind of a sailor at heart when it comes to these things, but I get it. This should say, yeah. I really, really, really don't want to get infected by COVID-19. Lasting lung damage? No, thank you. The more I read about this thing and the more it looks like it could be in there and the more I don't understand what's going to happen with secondary infections down the road, if they're really a thing, if we're going to have antibody-dependent enhancement, the ADE thing kicking in and making it worse the second time. I don't know about any of that stuff, right? This is a real honey badger of a virus. It's a beast. And it's absolutely ridiculous affinity for the ACE2 receptor as well. I think underappreciated CD 147 receptors as well. And its ability to get into the white blood cells, especially macrophages, I think underappreciated at this point. I think we're going to learn more about that over time, especially as the immunological consequences of this sort of come forward. And as we talked over the last couple days, before yesterday, on the days before that, we talked about all these different protocols that are now treating the immunosuppressive angles of this because immunologically something haywire is going on as well. The antioxidant angle of all this thing, because there's obviously the cold oxidative stress side of this. We're learning more and more about that, and at least part of all of this is due to the fact that this virus has a ridiculously strong binding site. It has a really perfectly well-placed furin cleavage site, and it's got a really amazing ability to both get in and then be active within cells. And because of that, it attacks a ton of different tissues. So I don't want it. That's what we're going with on that one. Remember, everybody, you got to resubscribe to this channel all the time because I'm busy out here asking, I'm being a misfit. I'm being a rebel. I'm being a troublemaker. You know what? I'm just out here working hard as I can to gather the data, ask the questions, do it logically, and if things change, I'm going to change with them as best I possibly can. Am I free from beliefs? Absolutely not. But I do my level best to know when I've got them, and I'm aware at least that I have a backfire effect. I'm aware at least of confirmation bias. I'm aware of the ways in which I do have biases, and I'll confess to one right now. I have a very strong bias that when people, such as I experienced in the virology community, are so strident and so they go for shaming and appeals to authority and, saying you don't know what you're talking about and all that. So, like, to be shouted down off of something tells me that there's something actually interesting over there. I need to go look at it a little bit more closely. That's a bias I have, right? It might not be appropriate, but it's one that I hold. All right, so resubscribe if necessary. And if you liked this, please hit the like button. It helps as much as we can. I know that we're fighting a battle here, and we're hoping we don't get deplatformed at some point because we keep asking these uncomfortable questions that, somebody doesn't want to have asked, all that other stuff, yada, yada. We're not a good team player for giant corporate 101 players out there. We tend to be a little bit more independent than that. And as well, plant a garden, please, 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 please. There's really some stuff coming down the pike that if you come by peakprosperity.com, particularly if you come over and you subscribe and you become part of that, we can talk about what we really think we see coming. And, there's a lot of things that I'm willing to talk about over there, but I'm not as willing to put out here on YouTube. And we got great conversations going on, like that quote that we started with from Dave DD. Hard to even pick out what was the best quote over there, but that was one that jumped out at me. So many high quality people putting really high quality posts over there. I invite you to join. Come on over. Don't be intimidated. We very welcoming to new people, very welcoming as long as you adhere to our rules, which are bring an open mind, bring your curiosity, bring the data, and be ready to change your mind if necessary when new facts come along. All right, that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. We'll be talking soon. Bye.
Hi, folks. Adam Taggart, co-founder of Peak Prosperity, here with good news. In his daily videos, Chris often refers to the book that he and I wrote, Prosper: How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. It presents a practical model for living with greater resilience, and those who read it and followed its advice were much better prepared for the coronavirus outbreak than the average household. Given its heightened relevance to the turbulent times we now find ourselves in, Chris and I want everyone to benefit from this book's formula for better, more secure living. So we're giving the book to you for free. To get your copy, simply visit peakprosperity.com/freebook. We think you'll find this an extremely valuable and inspiring resource for the current COVID-19 outbreak and for being well positioned for any kind of crisis that comes our way in the future. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.